Hello, I'm Greg, and this is episode 17 in my series on how to make a 3D space shooter from scratch in Unity. In this video, I'm going to be addressing an issue that a user requested. We're going to be adding scoring and a game over screen. So, if this is something you're interested in, then grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, and follow along as I teach you to write a 3D space shooter game in Unity. So in this video, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from my Defender series and do a new episode for my 3D Space Shooter series. I haven't put anything out for this series in a while, been focused on other things, but I actually had a viewer request this video. This guy, John Roberts, would like me to add scoring, and he goes on in this comment to talk about how he's tried to approach it, but he wants to know how I would do it. And he also would like to add a game over condition. In his case, he wants the game to be over and the player to win if they destroy a single enemy ship. And while that might not be the in-game condition most people would want, I thought it would be a good topic to cover in a tutorial and just to show how you can implement a game over condition, and you can pretty much configure any kind of victory condition you want. In fact, this series has really been about developing some fairly generic 3D space shooter components that you could apply to pretty much any game you can imagine. Maybe you want to do a RTS game where you explore and colonize planets, build bases, have them produce things, maybe add some economics to the game, do some trading with other colonies, other planets, or maybe just straight up space dogfighting, which is pretty much all we've done in this tutorial so far. But the components can be applied to pretty much anything you could put your imagination to. And for the sake of a tutorial, just to demonstrate how we could have a victory condition where if you destroy a single enemy ship, you win the game, I think that'd be worth demonstrating. The game really isn't a game yet in the sense that the player can't lose. The player can't even take damage. While the enemies shoot at the player and can hit the player's not actually taking any damage and can't be destroyed, so there's really no way to lose. But that's something I'll probably add in a future video as well. So we'll go ahead and tackle the scoring, but before I do that, another viewer actually made a comment where they noticed in my code that I was using the radar height instead of the radar width to set the Y position of the blips on the radar screen. Now, it really doesn't matter in this case because our radar screen is square, and so the width and the height are the same. But the viewer makes a really good point. It doesn't make sense to use a width variable to set the vertical position on something. One, it's just kind of confusing if you're looking at the code, but the other reason is for extensibility. Let's say in the future I add a different ship and maybe it's got a more horizontal radar display. That code would not work. Your vertical blips would be displayed up off the outside the edge of the radar screen if it was wider than it is high. So I agree with the viewer that it makes sense to go ahead and change that. And so we'll do that first before we actually tackle anything else. So to fix that, we're going to need to go into the radar screen script, which is under ship systems. So I'll double click on that. And we will zoom down to where we are setting the blip position. And down in here, we're setting blip position.y, and we're using radar width for the Y. So we're going to change this. We're going to say radar height, which doesn't currently exist. So if I put my cursor here and hit Control period, create field, we will generate that field. And now I'm going to use Control Alt Shift and use the arrow key to move this up right under radar width. So they're together right there. Now let's go find where we calculate radar width. And right here. So let's go ahead and stop searching. And we'll say radar width or height, radar height. It's radar height equals bounds.size.y. And let's go back and look at this assignment again. And that all should be fine. Just make sure there's no other occurrences of radar width. Nope. All right, so I'm assuming that it's going to continue to work. I'm not going to test that. But let's look at how we would start implementing scoring. So let's do the UI first. We're going to expand managers, go into UI manager in Canvas, and I'm going to right click here and say create empty, and I'm going to call this score. And I'm just going to go into the rect transform here, and I'm going to hit Control Alt Shift and anchor it to the top, and then I want it stretched across the top. So let me expand our scene view a little bit and double click on that and go into 2D mode. So I don't really think that's stretched. There we go. Control or Shift Alt click. Stretch that to fill the entire top portion of the screen. Underneath of that, we're going to add a couple of Text Mesh Pro fields. So I will right click, UI, Text Mesh Pro, and I will call this score. And I'm going to put a 0 here. And I actually want this one to be anchored up to the top left. So Alt Shift and then click in this upper left corner here. But I actually want to move it a little bit. Let me grab a little arrow here, move them down just a tad, and over just a tad. We definitely want to turn off wrapping, and I want it to be left justified but centered vertically. And we're not going to want that font. I think I'm going to use that Orbitron font that we use for the other UI elements. So click that. And let's see what we want for the font size. I think that that's a good font size too. So there's our score. Let's add one for the high score. I'm just going to duplicate that. Call it high score. Get rid of the little extra stuff there. This one I want to actually center horizontally and vertically. And I want to anchor it to the middle there. But then again, I want to bring it down -8 just like that. Just so they're lined up. And there we've got our high score and our score. All right. So now we need to write some scripting to actually update those score texts. So let's go into our UI Manager script and zoom in. Get rid of this unused using statement. And we're going to add a few UI elements to this script. Let's go down here, add another serialized field. And this will be a TMP text. Now that doesn't exist, so we're going to have Rider pull in the TM Pro namespace. And we're going to add score text and high score text. All right. Now, one thing I want to do, since I want to be able to set the score from different places in the game, I'm going to make this a singleton like I did some of the other components. So up at the top of the class here, I'm going to say public static UI manager instance. And then in our awake method, oh, wait a minute. Oh, it looks like I've already done that. All right, strike all that. I'm going to move this up to the top of the file, put my public stuff up there. All right. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to subscribe to events and unsubscribe from events. So the UI manager is actually going to receive events from another manager. I'm actually going to create a score manager. So let me just go to the bottom of the folder here, and I'm going to say public class score manager. And that will be a mono behavior. You know what? I'm going to do this differently because I want to show you something. Let me go back out into Unity. And while we're in here, I'll go ahead and assign these variables. So we got our score text and our high score text, and they're now assigned there. One thing I want to do, there's something that annoys me, and I've fixed this for the other versions of Unity. This is using the latest, one of the latest 2022 versions. I actually upgraded my version since my last video for this series, but I haven't edited the template for new scripts for this project. So let me show you what happens there. If I right click here and I say create C# script, and I'll call this score manager, and I double click that to open it, you see we get all of this boilerplate code that we almost always end up deleting. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to go back out in the Unity, and I'm going to delete that script we just created. And I am going to go into the folder where Unity puts its script templates. So that's going to be under Program Files. And there's a different folder for every version of Unity that you've installed. So this is the version we want here. And if you go into Editor, Data, Resources, Script Templates, this new behavior script is the one we want to edit. So I'm actually going to bring up our code editor, and I'm just going to drag that script into there. And we're going to get rid of the stuff we don't want. And then I'm just going to save that. Oh, and it will not let me save it because I am not running as administrator. So I will copy all this, and I will close this without saving. I'm going to actually open up a command prompt as administrator. And I'm going to run Notepad. And I'm going to paste that into there. And I'm going to say save as. And we'll go up to C:, Program Files. And we're just going to save that over there. Yes, I want to replace it. All right. Exit out of here. Go back into Unity. And we're going to create a new script. Create C# script score manager. And we'll double click that to open it up. And look at that. All that boilerplate code is omitted. So that will save us some time in the future as we create new scripts. I don't have to go through that rigmarole of deleting the boilerplate code because it's not there. Okay. So what do we want to do in Score Manager? Well, I want it to be a singleton. So we'll say public static Score Manager instance. And we will add an awake method. And I will say if instance is not equal to null and instance is not equal to this, then I want to destroy the game object and return. Otherwise, I will say instance equals this. There we go, our singleton pattern. Now let's add a couple of events. Now, so far in this series, I've only been using Unity events. And they're great, and they would work fine for this. But I just want to show you how you can use regular C# events if that's what you want to do. So I'm going to say public, oops, why did it do that? Let's try this again. Public event action, and I want it to be have an integer parameter because that's going to be the score. And I'm going to call this score changed. And what I've often done in the past is I would just check to see if this has been subscribed to, where I want to invoke it. So like say I was invoking it from here, I would do score change dot invoke. But I learned from Jason Wyman, there's another way to do this. I can actually just initialize this to a delegate like that. And then all I would have to do to invoke it is just say score changed and pass in my score. And it doesn't matter if anything is subscribed to this or not. It's not going to blow up. We're not going to get an error. It's just going to call the empty delegate and nothing will happen. So I like that approach and I'm going to use it. I'm going to copy this and we're going to add, oh, by the way, when I created this, Writer, the editor I'm using, automatically added this using system namespace. That's where action is defined. So if you're not using Writer, or if your IDE did not automatically add this using statement, you need to go add it manually. So we'll make this high score changed. All right. And we're going to add a couple of properties for our score. We want them to have public getters and private setters. So I have score get private set and high score get private set. All right, I want to have a public function reset score, and that will set the score to be 0, and it will call that score changed event and pass in score. Just like that. And this needs to be a void. And let's add a function to set the score, or add points actually. How's that? Add points, int points. And I will just say score plus equals points. And I will fire the score changed event with score. And then I want to check and see if we are beating our high score. So I will first just say if score is less than or equal to high score, just return. Otherwise, I'm going to say that high score equals score, and then I'm going to fire the high score changed event. Just like that. And that's all we need for our score manager. So let's go back into our UI manager and see how we can leverage that. So this might be a little bit of overkill the way I'm going to do this, but I want to make sure it's because of the execution order of these functions that I'm going to do it this way. I want to initially subscribe to the events and start. But thereafter, I want to subscribe to them and on enable, because it's possible that this guy could be disabled and re-enabled. For instance, if we change scenes or something. But I mean, it's not likely. It's probably not necessary. But I'm going to do it anyway, just to show you how, if you did have something that got enabled and disabled, this is how you could subscribe to events and unsubscribe reliably. So I think I want to add this up near the top. So we have our awake. Let's add an on enable. And what do we want to do in here? We want to say subscribe to events. And that doesn't exist. So I'm going to create that. And I want to, of course, if you subscribe to something, you want to unsubscribe. So on disable, unsubscribe from events. And I'm going to move both of these guys down below our public methods. All the way at the bottom should be good. And I actually want this one to be below the other one. By the way, I did Control Shift Alt and use the arrow keys to do that. All right. Shift delete to delete an entire line. Now I also want to in start, I'll put that after here. I'm going to say start. Subscribe to events. All right. So what do I want to do in subscribe to events? Well, I want to subscribe to Score Manager events. And I'm doing this in a separate call because I'm also going to have GameManager events that I want to set to handle the game over state and that sort of thing. So subscribe to Score Manager events, and then unsubscribe from Score Manager events. And control period. All right, and then control period. And I just move this down. There we go. So to subscribe to the Score Manager events, all I'm going to do is say if Score Manager dot instance, actually if not Score Manager dot instance, just return. So like in onEnable initially, since onEnable runs before awake, I do believe, it's possible that this instance won't be initialized yet. And I don't want to try and subscribe to the events if this is not initialized yet. So what we'll do then is just return. Otherwise, and just to be safe, it doesn't hurt to do this. I'm going to say unsubscribe from Score Manager events. And then I'm going to say Score Manager dot instance dot score changed plus equals on score changed, and generate that. And I actually want this to go down at the bottom. And then we will also add a subscription to high score changed. Control period. Move that down to the bottom. And I want to change this to score and change this to high score. Now let's implement our unsubscribe. Get rid of this. Don't want to recursively call ourselves. And we're just going to change these plus signs to minus signs. And move that brace down to the bottom. All right, so now in our event handlers, this is going to be so simple. We would just say score text equals score dot toString, and high score text equals high score toString. Easy peasy. I think that's it for our UI manager. Now we need to actually have a way to score points. Now the guy that gave me the feedback, if I go and look and see what he said again, he wants to score points every time you destroy an asteroid. And I would guess you'd also want to earn points when you destroy the enemy ship too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new component, and I'm going to call this AddPointsWhenDestroyed. And it will, as you can imagine, when it's destroyed, call this Score Manager and say add points for whatever points it happens to be worth. And we'll make that definable with a serialized field. But first, let's go back into Unity. We need to, I want you to think for a second. If I was to run this right now, what do you think would happen? I'll let you think for a second. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to work because our UI manager is trying to reference the Score Manager. but there's no instance of the score manager in our game. So up here under managers, let's create an empty game object, and let's call this score manager, and drag our score manager script onto it. So now we've got a score manager. And if you remember our managers, the top level guy here, this manager script, he's got don't destroy on load on him. He's also a singleton. It's just got a private static member, so we don't ever access this from anywhere else. But when he's instantiated, he calls don't destroy on load on his game object. And so what that means is that all the children of that manager's parent object will stick around. In fact, let's just go ahead and run the game and see what happens. Oh, I actually need to, well, I guess I can hit the pause right here. So if I hit pause and we come over here and look at our hierarchy and scroll down underneath all these asteroids, boy, that's a lot of asteroids. Down at the bottom, we've got this don't destroy on load. And if I expand that, we got game manager, camera manager, UI manager. We've got music manager, sound manager, enemy ship manager, and score manager. All of those managers live under the manager's parent object, and they will not be destroyed because this guy won't be destroyed, and they're all children of it. Just thought I would just remind you all that in case you forgot how we ended up implementing that. Okay, so now we want to actually score points. And to do that, we're going to create a script called AddPointsWhenDestroyed. It's going to be a very simple script. I'm going to put it at the root of our scripts folder here. We'll say right-click, create, C# script, AddPointsWhenDestroyed. And we'll double click that, go into Unity, and we are going to add a very, this is going to be a very simple script. We're going to add a serialized field for the number of points that this will be worth. We'll default it to 20. Asteroids will default to 20. And then we're going to have an onDestroy method, and all we're going to do is say score manager dot instance add points. Now, I'm going to do something that might seem a little bit odd. I'm also going to add points. I'm actually going to extract this out into another function. Control-Shift-R. There we go. Control-Shift-R, extract method, and I'm going to call this add score. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to also call this from onDisable. And I don't like the duplicate code, even though it's just one line. And actually, I want to do something else in here. I want to have some extra logic. I want to say if scored, return. Otherwise, scored equal true. And then I'm going to create that variable. So let's go ahead and add this to the objects that we want to score points for. And so we'll go into our prefabs folder and go into asteroids. We're going to pick all of these rocks. And we're going to scroll down here. I'm going to minimize some of this stuff. And I like my scripts to be at the bottom. So I'm going to drag that down below the capsule collider. Just make it a little bit neater. Now we're going to add component, add points when destroyed. And that's fine, 20 points. Let's go into prefabs, ships, go into our enemy ship, and add component, add points when destroyed, and make this guy worth 1,000 points. And hit play and give this a test. Start blowing up. You notice we have 0 points. Our high score is 0. We have 40 points. Let's go blow up a ship. He's insanely easy to blow up with these missiles. And there he goes. He's dead. We've got 1,040 points, and our high score is 1,040. The next thing we want to do is handle the game state change events so we can tell when the game is over. We're going to handle that in our GameManager. So we'll go into our GameManager object up here and double click on the GameManager script. Zoom in, get rid of this using statement. And right here near the top of the file, I'm going to add an event. Public event action, and we'll let it add the system namespace, and we're going to call this game state. We're going to have to generate that. I'm actually going to create that, and this event's going to be game state changed, and I'm going to use Jason Wyman's little trick to make that a delegate. Just like that. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom of the file here, and I'm going to say public enum game state. And what are the game states that we want? I think we'll start out in patrol, so there's no enemies around. And then we'll be in combat. We can go back to patrol, back and forth between patrol and combat, and then game over are the three states that we're going to worry about. I'm going to select this and say control period, move to GameState.cs. And we'll add that to source control. So there you can see we've got our little game state enumeration. Let's go back into GameManager, go up to the top of the file. You can see our compiler error went away. So let's add a function to set the game state. I'm going to put that right before onEnable. Void set game state, game state, game state. Saying game state a lot. And we will say the game state, oh, we need to add a variable for this, equals game state. So it's probably not going to like that. So let's come up here and add a private variable. Right here we will say game state, make it a public getter and a private setter. And this needs to be public. And I'll move this up. Okay, and then in onEnable, we'll call set game state, and we'll set it to patrol. The other thing we want our set game state function to do is call the game state changed and pass in the new game state. And actually, I'm going to say if game state equals the current game state, then I'm just going to return and not do anything. All right. Now we've got a in combat method here. So basically, if we're already in combat, I just want to say if game state equals game state.combat, then we'll just return. Otherwise, down here, I'm going to say game state equals, actually, I'm going to say set state, and I'm going to pass in combat. And I'm going to add a public function here called player1. And all we're going to do in here is say that we're going to set the state to be game over. Oops. And remember, that will fire the game state changed event. And we're going to have the UI manager throw up a game over screen when that happens. But we also want to have our music manager play some game over music. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to say music manager.instance.play game over music. Now guess what? We don't have any game over music. So let's create that function. Go into our music manager. We got combat music, we got patrol music, we've got game over music. Let's go take a look at what we need to do in here. So we're going to want to add another audio mixer snapshot. So we've got a patrol snapshot, we got a combat snapshot. We want to add a game over snapshot. And now that it's getting long, I think it's time to break this up into multiple lines. I lost my combat snapshot. Let's just duplicate this and change this to combat snapshot. All right. And we're not actually going to add an audio clip for the game over music. I think I'm just going to have a separate audio source that will just enable. That already will have just the one clip that we're going to use. So I'll say game over audio source. And those will be assigned in the inspector. And again, I think it's time to break this up into multiple lines. Why does it... That's really interesting that it does that. All right. And I guess I'll just go ahead and break this up too while I'm at it. Oh, that's an array. Okay, audio clip array of combat music. All right, just a little bit neater and cleaner. Let's go down to our play game over music. All we're going to do is say game over music dot play, and then I'm going to tell the snapshot the transition over a period of a second. All right, let's go back into Unity and go ahead and add this stuff. So in our audio mixer, let's drag this up a little bit. Main mix, we got patrol snapshot, we got combat. Let's go ahead and duplicate that and rename it. And we'll call that game over snapshot. Let's bring up our music manager. And we're going to want to select the game over snapshot right there. We need to add an audio source here. Actually, yeah, I'll do that. Audio source. And we want to give it a music clip. So what would be a good music clip for our game over audio source? If we go into our audio file, our folder, under simple music, I like that, rhythmic bounce A. So go up to music manager and go into that audio source, and we'll pick rhythmic bounce A. All right, and we want it to not play on awake, but we do want it to loop. Although I doubt they're going to sit there on that screen that long enough for it to loop. Now for our game over audio source, we'll just drag that audio source right into there. All right, let's go down to our game over snapshot here. We need to add another group here. So we'll say game over, And let's go into our different snapshots. So in our patrol snapshot, we don't want any game over volume. In our combat snapshot, we don't want any game over volume. Yeah, and in our game over snapshot, we do want this, but let's pull it down to about where that is. -5. And let's pull down the patrol music. And we might as well pull down the sound effects too. All right, now all we need to do is trigger the game over condition. So let's get out of this thing here, and let's go look at our enemy ship manager, and we'll double click that. And we're going to make quite a few changes in here to try and handle this game over state. One thing I want to do is, I think instead of just looking at game objects, I want to look at enemy ship controllers. So our collection of enemy ships will be enemy ship controllers. And for our active enemies, we need to get the game object off of this since it's no longer a game object itself. So that's a pretty simple change there. Now in onEnable, we're going to want to instantiate, instead of a list of game objects, a list of enemy ship controllers. Okay, and I want to add a start method. And in here, we want to subscribe to the GameManager's game state changed event. So we're going to say GameManager.instance.gameStateChanged. And we're going to call this onGameStateChanged. And let's control period, generate that. And we're going to put this all the way down at the bottom of the file. And we're going to call this GameState. If it's not game over, so we'll say if GameState is not equal to game over, then we're just going to return. There we go. Return. Otherwise, we just want to destroy all of our enemy ships that might still be flying around, because the guy that requested this feature, he wants to win the game immediately if you destroy a single enemy ship. So in order to meet that condition and have it not be weird, we want to stop any enemy ships from flying around after you've won the game. So all we're going to do is we're going to loop through our enemy ships. We're going to just actually do a while loop and say as long as there are enemy ships in our collection, so we'll say while enemy ships.any, then we're going to get the ship at the first position in the list, and we're going to call its ship destroyed remove listener. Basically, we don't want any more ship destroyed events to be fired for that guy because we're about to destroy it. So let's say ship.shipDestroyed.remove listener on ship destroyed. Oops. I always hit, instead of saying tab, I think I hit enter. So we've done that. Now we're going to deactivate it. And we're going to remove it from our collection. And we'll do that until there's no more ships in our collection. Pretty simple stuff. Now we want to fix some things where we spawn our enemy ships. The first thing we want to do is we don't want to keep spawning ships if the game is over. So we're going to say if GameManager.instance.gameState equals game over, just return. So now we're not going to keep spawning ships if the game is over. Now we're instantiating our prefab here. So I want to add some different things here. We get our enemy. I want to say enemy ship controller. It's going to be enemy.getComponent enemy ship controller. And we want to subscribe to his ship destroyed event. So instead of doing all this, I'm just going to say enemy ship controller dot ship destroyed. And we're going to add enemy ship controller to our collection instead of enemy ships. And everything else there should be fine. Now, down here is where the magic's going to happen. So when this ship is destroyed, we're going to try and find the instance ID of that ship in our collection. So we're going to have to change this to use the game object to get the instance ID for the game object. And then we're going to say GameManager.instance.player1. So we destroyed an enemy ship, the player won. Now I do want to go and take a look at our enemy ship controller, and where we set our, when we report that we were destroyed, we're saying get instance ID. We want to use GameObject.getInstanceID. I think I also want to check, and I want to say destroyed equals true when we're destroyed. I'm just worried about destroying this guy more than once. And I also don't want to continue doing things if we are destroyed. So down here, I'm going to say if destroyed, return. And the same thing in here with get next state. If destroyed, then we're just going to say return enemy ship state.none. Even though it should be getting removed by the enemy ship manager anyway. I just want to try to avoid it doing any weird stuff after it's been destroyed. Now we do need to set that destroyed variable. We did that here. Good. Yeah, all that looks good. So now that we've got the script written for that, we need to go back into Unity and set up the UI. So we're going to go into our UI manager, into the canvas, and under the canvas I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a panel. So under UI panel, and I'm going to call it Game Over. And I want to make the background color of that panel image basically black. Something like that. And then we're going to add some Game Over text. So I'll say UI Text Mesh Pro, and we'll call this Game Over. Actually, I want to call it Game Over Text, just to make it very clear. And our text is going to say Game Over. It's centered in there, which is good. We're going to want to switch to that Orbitron font, but I'm going to want the font size this time to be a lot bigger. So let's try 128. We don't want it to wrap like that, so let's center, disable wrapping, and just to make sure that it is centered there, I think that looks good. So there's our screen right there. That's what the Game Over screen looks like. All right, so we need to go back into our UI Manager script and add the code for the Game Over screen. So let's double click that. Let's save our project first. I always like to do that. I often forget. All right, let's zoom in here, and we're going to add a new serialized field. And I'm going to call that Game Object Game Over Screen. All right. And the first thing we're going to do on enable after subscribing to events is we're going to say Game Over Screen dot set active false. So we don't want the Game Over screen to be displayed when we first start the game. Now we're subscribing to events, but we're only subscribing to the Score Manager events. So we want to also subscribe to GameManager events. So subscribe to GameManager events. And if you're going to subscribe to them, we also want to unsubscribe. All right. And let's copy this line here. And we also want to call that, no, I guess that's it. All right, so let's just control period to create that method, and control period to create that method. All right, and I'm going to move this down. Actually, move it up one more. And as you can imagine, we're just going to say GameManager.instance.GameStateChanged plus equals on GameStateChanged. And we'll copy that down to here and change this to a minus sign. And control period, create method. And let's move this down to the bottom right above on score changed. And oops, let's change this to game state. All right, so all we want to do in here is say if game state equals game over. Actually, what we can do is we can say game over screen dot set active. So whenever the game state changes to game over, it will activate that game over screen. All right, let's see if any of this works. I'll honestly be surprised if everything works the first time. Oh, game over screen, we need to assign it here in the inspector. Hit play. Ooh, I got it. It did work, but then we got a null reference exception after the fact. So what do you think that null reference exception is? Object of type transform has been destroyed, but you are still trying to access it. It's coming from the radar screen. So it looks like we're going to have to put some logic in here. Draw target blips. Where is this called from? It's called from late update. So what we can do here is we can say if GameManager.instance.GameState equals game over, return. Now there is a coroutine that we start, if I recall. Yes, refresh target list. All we got to do is say if GameManager.instance.GameState equals game over, yield break. That will break us out of this coroutine. Let's go back into Unity and give this another test. What is it complaining about here? Nah, nasty little race condition. Come out, wherever you are. I might need to set the range, the radar range, to be a little bit higher. It's not detecting the enemy. There he is. Man, he's tough. All right. So it's not perfect. The the player ship still moves. I can still fly the player ship around even though the game is over. So I need to add some logic to the player ship to not do that. The other thing we want to do is, you'll notice if I play the game again, our high score will be reset to 0. So finally, I would like to handle saving the high score and loading it when the game starts. And we'll do that in Score Manager. We're going to add a key for PlayerPrefs here. It will be a string. We'll call it high score key and set it to be high score. Now we want to add a start method down here above awake. Actually, I'll put it after awake. And what we're going to do in here is say that high score equals PlayerPrefs.getInt high score key with a default value of 0 if it doesn't already exist. And then we want to fire the high score changed event with that high score to force the UI to update. That will cause the high score to get displayed when the game starts. Now we want to save the high score when the game ends. So we're going to add an onDisable, and we're going to say PlayerPrefs.setInt high score key high score. And that should handle that. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to make sure we don't add points when the game is over. When the game is over, the game manager and all the managers are going to start destroying their children. And there's the script on the asteroids, for example, when it gets disabled or destroyed, it's going to add points for every single one of them. And there are a lot of asteroids, and we'll add points for all of them, which will bump up our high score if we don't account for the fact that the game's over. So I'm going to say if GameManager.instance.gameState is equal to game over, just return. Now we need to do something else. In the Game Manager, down here where we quit the game, we want to say game state equals game over. And that'll make sure that when we just escape out of the game, that it sets that flag that the score manager is going to use to determine not to add any more points. So let's go ahead and give this a test. Right now we should have no high score, so it should be 0. And it is. Let's blow up some asteroids. Boom. So we've got 60 points. We've got 80 points. Let's blow up an enemy ship. Why not? Oh, there's missiles inbound. Boom. So we had 1,080 points. Remember that number? Let's hit play. And look at that. Our high score is 1,080. Well, there you go, John Roberts. I've shown you how I would go about implementing scoring and adding a game over screen. There's quite a lot more we can do with that. We could pretty up that game over screen to say you've won and maybe show their total points and whether or not they beat the high score. There's a lot more to be done with the game in general. We need to add the ability for the ship to take damage and be destroyed. And then we'd probably want to add UI elements for the number of lives remaining. And we want to have a game over screen for when the player loses. But those can all be done in future videos. And of course, you can feel free to take this game in whatever direction you want. In the meantime, don't forget to click that like and subscribe button. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm to get this content in front of as many people as possible. And if you have any more questions or suggestions, leave a comment below. And as you can see, I do my best to try to read and respond to all comments. And if anybody has any detailed questions about anything that we've covered, something that is a little too detailed to go into in a YouTube comment, go check out my Discord server. There'll be a link in the description. And I try to frequent that and see if there's any traffic there. So far, I haven't had much traffic to that channel, but hopefully that will change in the future. So anyway, thanks so much for watching and good luck on your game development journey.